2 p.m. Eastern. You know what that means, bold leaders in learning. I'm your host, Brandon Busteed, Chief Partnership Officer and Global Head of Learn Work Innovation at Kaplan. And I'm excited to talk to Vistasp Karbhari today, who's an engineering professor at UT Arlington, a frequent writer on the topic that we're going to be discussing today, was also the president at UT Arlington for 7 years between 2013 and 2020, has had a very long and distinguished career in higher education, and has become somebody that I just enjoy listening to, following, and when we can, having conversations together. So today we're going to have one of those conversations live with an audience and invite you to send us some questions as we're doing so. But Vistasp, thank you for joining me today. Would love to just have you say a little bit more about your background and some of the areas that you've been focused on lately, and then we're going to dive into a conversation about embedding and integrating certifications in degrees.
Sounds great, Brandon. It's a pleasure being on the show with you. As you mentioned, I'm an engineering professor at the University of Texas at Arlington in the Department of Civil Engineering and the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. I'm actually very, very passionate about the power of higher education to ensure social mobility. And so right now, what we really need to look at is how we're using that power of higher ed, the promise, if you will, that we've always talked about, to make sure that every student, irrespective of where they are in their lives or what their background is, has the opportunity to grow from the knowledge that we provide them, but also to be able to be a productive member of the workforce. The integration, if you will, of the learned citizen that we want every person to be, simultaneously with being able to move their own careers, their own professions, either as a member of the workforce or an entrepreneur, someone who's actually creating the future of the workforce.
Well, you and I are on the same page around that we believe it's not mutually exclusive for higher education to produce both the learned citizen and somebody who is very specifically skilled and ready for a high value job and career. And, obviously we've had dialogue across the academy that, has largely treated those things as an either or. And so I'm thrilled, obviously, to have you on the show because I know we're kindred spirits in that view. And of course, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of how we help higher ed move more in that direction. As you and I have talked, there are certainly certain individual institutions that are doing a far better job on this than others who have made a real commitment to this. There's a smattering of, of involvement and buy-in from faculty who are all over this and very embracing of it, and others that seem to be very resistant to it. And so, why don't we start there a little bit before we kind of get into, some of the more practical things that universities can do around this. We talked about the issue of silos and the challenge of silos, and we talked about that through a number of different lenses, but maybe start there. You were telling me about the silos between internships and academics. And then we were also talking about departments and academic silos. So flesh that out a little bit for me, because I think you have a powerful vision for where higher ed needs to go on that front.
Sure. If you look at it, most of the discoveries that are made today are made at the interstices, if you will, of different disciplines. So we can no longer talk about a discipline by itself as we would have been able to talk about maybe 100 years ago. And when we look at our faculty and we talk about our faculty either being willing to do something or not being willing to do something, we have to actually recognize that we've put them into these administrative constructs that are not necessarily where they would prefer to be. Because if you look at a faculty member, and if you look at a faculty member who's dedicated to their art, it's really in terms of imparting that knowledge to a student and making it possible for the student to become better than them, so that the student has been given this worldwide view, is ready for the challenges that come forth. And the structures that we've put up through the last century in academia have been those of silos. So whether it becomes that of a department, where you can take courses in only this department and you're only allowed X% of courses from another department, even though those might be the exact courses you need.
Yeah.
Or we basically say that we have something called the core or general ed, which is a wonderful idea and should be there for all our students because it gives them the background that they need to be learned citizens, to have the outside sort of knowledge, that broad base in the liberal arts and sciences that is needed. But again, what we've done is we've sort of separated that from everything else to say you will finish X credit hours. That'll be separate from the credit hours somewhere else. And to make it easy on ourselves, we've actually made it sort of a tick mark that you complete 3 courses in X and 4 courses in Y. If you talk to our faculty, they'd like to integrate that a lot more so that this truly is not just a course in philosophy and a course in mathematics and a course in chemistry, but how do those come together for the student? We've done the same thing in terms of the academic sort of knowledge that we give them and the workforce skills or talents that we hope that they'll gain. We all look in terms of internships, but the challenge is an internship is always done after the fact. It is something separate that is primarily done in summer when you're not taking courses. Or if you look at study abroad, it is a thing that is done, a very valuable aspect of education, but it's done as something for which you have to take a gap. And you have to stop doing everything else unless you're very lucky to get the exact courses that can transfer. We have the opportunity today of integrating all of those, and some universities have done it far better than others. Some have taken the co-op and have done extremely well at the co-op, but they haven't integrated courses into the co-op.
Right.
Just as you and I were talking, we could have a course to prepare them for a co-op. We could have a course for reflection after the co-op, but we could also have, now that we've proven to ourselves that you can have high quality digital and online education taking place and learning taking place. It doesn't have to be an either or. And we can actually integrate all of them. Coming back to the first part about the disciplines, just think of what we could do if we had supplementary modules that talked about how A would be more relevant while you were working in an internship, so that students saw the relationship between the academic work that was being done in the classroom with what they're actually going through at work. And if we involve the corporate world side by side in that, I know we're now talking about a lot of different silos, but if we truly integrated that, we might actually do what we talked about when the land grant mission first came about, the Moral Act, if you will. And if you look at most universities, we follow that structure. And the structure is one where you basically look at, it's a knowledge in the widest possible sense that will help the student become both a better citizen and be better prepared for a very productive sort of career and a life.
There's so much you said in that. It was a very rich vein of commentary, Vistas. But you know, the big point here is that we now have kind of given permission to all the things you've just discussed, right? I mean, the pandemic has, I mean, it's done a lot of catastrophic things to this country, right? But it's also given permission to those kinds of ideas, right? Why shouldn't we be able to, a student, take online classes for credit while they're working in an internship, right? Why not, instead of taking a year off, they're doing a year of work while they're still doing academic load through online courses. And they could be doing that potentially anywhere in the world, right? So I'm enthused that we have, as I kind of use the expression, given permission to these things, or certainly let leaders realize that they can start to think in those ways. You know, we're already getting several questions, and I'm going to go to the audience on 2 of these. So the first one, which relates to this, you already mentioned it. John asked, you mentioned how there can be resistance to, these ideas in traditional higher ed. How do we get professors and deans to buy into this idea? I mean, you are a professor, right? You've been an academic leader, a president leader. Tell me how you've seen good examples of faculty buy-in and maybe not so great examples.
So I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is that our faculty are already working very, very hard and doing a wonderful job at what they're already doing. And each time we add something else to their palette, we need to figure out how we're going to support them. So very often when we see the resistance, or we hear of the resistance to change or the resistance to doing something else, it's not because they don't want to do it. It just comes out to be, okay, I would love to do it, but A, where's the time? And B, where are the supporting mechanisms? If you ask a faculty member to help a student get a better job, most of our faculty are doing that already. They have all their connections, and our students go directly to them, sometimes more often to them than to the career development centers. And they are actually placing students in internships. What we need to do is to actually provide that support and clarity in terms of what we want to do. So when we go off in 16 different areas all at the same time and say, figure out what sort of fits you best, and no, we're not going to give you the support systems to make it possible to integrate what they need to do by inviting people from the workforce in, or being able to provide a work experience, but we're also going to say a student cannot miss any time. So a lot of that is because of structures we've put in place. I think if we actually empowered our faculty to do this within that context of making both things side by side, so it's not a question of either or, and that's been the real challenge. Most of our faculty want to make sure that our students are well prepared for life, not just that first job. And the big fear is that if we go too deep into a career prep, then they're not going to have the skills for the second, third, and fourth job. And so we've got to find a way at the university level to move from what has always been a T-shaped sort of structure, where you have the basic skills and then you have the disciplinary skills, to more of a pie-shaped structure, so where you have the basic skills, the disciplinary skills, and then you have the skills that they're going to need in the workforce, and make it possible for all those to be integrated. And we've got to give our faculty credit and the time to do all this. I think if you do that, you'll actually find that most faculty are on board already.
Yeah, super points. I mean, higher ed loves to keep adding. Not an institution that's known for actually figuring out what it's going to take away every time it adds, right? Whether that's to faculty or just new initiatives, right? And so that might be one of the hardest things that I see university leaders struggle with is, as you launch or identify new strategic priorities, what things do you deprioritize or get rid of, or, right, like that's really hard for higher ed to do. And as a segue to our topic, right, we're going to talk a little bit about this straightforward idea of allowing students to pursue both a degree and some sort of industry recognized credential or specific skill set as part of their education. We've already gotten a couple questions about this, but as a setup to it, and I'll move to these questions very quickly. There is a movement now. It's a relatively fresh movement of universities thinking about offering various kinds of non-degree programs, right, in the spirit of upskilling and reskilling opportunities for the workforce. And so, there's a lot of different examples of it. You've been thinking deeply about how do universities kind of do this, embrace it? Where do these industry credentials and skills sit within the academic program or the degree or major? So, the work that I've been doing at Kaplan, we talk about it through what we call credigree initiatives, right? The blend of a credential and a degree. Mm-hmm. And in simple ways, we're trying to support universities by helping them launch industry recognized credential prep courses as part of degree programs or separately, right? So a lot of neat things happening in the space. I would love to have you just unpack a little bit some of the things that you've been writing on this topic, how it could look, sure, right? What the vision is, and what are some of those key scaffolding elements that help support faculty and students and, the institution writ large to make these kinds of things happen.
So let's start out with sort of the two parallel aspects. The first is there's a difference, at least in my mind, between co-skilling, which is what you do during a degree, and the upskilling, which is what you do to add to something that someone already has, but is just going to help them move forward in an ever-changing world. Therefore, and those three are all we have to that we understand locally. Maybe just one department or one university does not
Vistasp, if you can hear me, you froze on our end here. So hopefully up, maybe, yep. You're still on mute if you can unmute.
Okay, sorry, am I back?
Better, that's better. That's awesome.
It
Thanks.
must
Yeah,
have
you
been a
just kind
blip
of.
somewhere. So I don't know where I got cut out. So I was
Well,
talking about the challenge that we're very good at creating our own sort of structure, which no one else can understand. And we talk about certificates and we talk about credentials and certifications. We have to make sure that what we're offering our students is not just another line on a transcript that no one else can understand. It has to be something that is not only understood, but is accepted by other people. So that if we create a certificate in, let's say, X, it's a certificate that will get them to the next step in their careers. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, the University of Texas at Arlington was approached by the aerospace industry when there was a large need for people skilled in the areas of drones or UAVs, if you will. And so what our faculty were able to do very well was to create self-standing certificates that were also integrated into degrees. So this gave the student, if you will, writ large, because some of those students are people who are going to get a full degree and others who are working professionals who just need that package of knowledge. What we have to make sure of is to make sure that package of knowledge can be stacked so that a student who tries to do something does not have to start afresh each time, either because the knowledge will not transfer or because no one else recognizes it. So I think that's the important part that we have to keep in mind as we create these new credentials, that they have to be those that are in areas that are of high workforce need. And that means we constantly have to upgrade and look at what we're offering, but we also have to work very closely with organizations such as chambers of commerce or the local workforce, that's a development board, so that we can identify those areas and then provide the skills that are necessary for them. We've also got to find a way simultaneously at being able to integrate these into our degrees. Now, not everything is going to be integratable, but it shouldn't be that you do something that is really good, and because 20% of it is different from something that would be taught in a course, that you're no longer given any credit for it. We have the capability now of adding a module that could be done online so that the full academic rigor still exists while you also have a certificate side by side.
Yeah, it's so a couple things that are actually linked to a couple of the questions that are sitting in the queue here. And one is from Max, who's asking, are you seeing that students are really hungry for these sorts of certification programs as they're coming in, right? Or is it something they're learning about, exploring later while in school? What have you observed on that front?
So it's a mix. So keep in mind, we have a mix of students as well. You have the quote unquote traditional student who comes directly from high school. Let's say that student is looking for an academic sort of experience, at least to begin with. But you also have students who we could call non-traditional students, post-traditional students, real college students. So use the moniker that you want. But these are students who have come as transfer students, the students who've come who are returning from the workforce. These are older students, if you will, in terms of age and experience. But a lot of them are looking for not just that academic degree, but something that will take them to the next step in their careers, and looking for things that can be in little bite-sized chunks, because not all of them are going to go continuously to the end of the degree because of work responsibilities, family responsibilities, economics. So what they want to be able to do is to say, okay, if I finish this much, will I get a jump start in what I'm going to be working at? It might not be their final goal, but can we help them take that next step? And for those, absolutely, they come in with this need and the desire to get a credential and even get a certification, which would actually qualify them, if you will, with a license or a certification to get a better job or to be able to do something that is more relevant.
Yep. You know, you talked about this on a couple of the different threads here in our conversation, you know, the idea of, we need to make sure that students get something that clearly represents value in the marketplace, right? They could have had the greatest, we could create these certificate or credential type programs. They could be the greatest, highest quality things. But if an employer has no idea what it means, if there's no translation of that into, oh, that's what I'm trying to hire for, right? We kind of missed the point. And we were talking earlier about the big new report from Credential Engine that came out last month showing that there are now nearly 1 million unique credentials in the United States. One of the big takeaways from that is that, maybe 0.0001% of those are recognized by an employer, right? And the employer looks at it and goes, oh, I know what that is. And if I can hire that person, I know they can do X, right? So it's this sliver of the overall market. And, the concern is that we flood the market with so many of these things that no one knows what the translational value is. And I always think, I would argue the most famous credential in the United States is the Eagle Scout. And somebody could argue this with me, right? But when you see an Eagle Scout on a resume, everybody goes, whoa, an Eagle Scout, right? It's like this really neat thing. Well, that took years and decades to get to the place where people respected the Eagle Scout. So it's possible to take a badge or a certificate and get it to a place where it has renowned credibility, but they're few and far between, right? Like I can't think of really anything else that is in that ballpark. So how do we help higher ed prevent this proliferation where really well-intentioned effort leads to, I don't know what any of that means, right? Like how do we avoid that?
So part of it is in being able to integrate the corporate side with the university. So that before a university starts something out, it actually sits with the potential employers and finds out something common across them. I mean, we've definitely done this very well in the education sphere. So we've done it very well in the health sciences sphere. It's been done by some universities in construction engineering and construction management, as well as industrial engineering. It's been done in the cybersecurity end extremely well by some because they've been able to define as this new area came up, what were the needs in cybersecurity so that there was a commonality between what the employer wanted and what is the basic knowledge that would be given at a university level. I think the same thing needs to be done in a lot of these areas where we really have to sit down with the potential employer base to come up with a common taxonomy and terminology, and then being able to provide that as is needed. We've also got to sort of say no to a number of things. If you look at it right now, there are almost 1 million certificates and credentials and certifications available out there, which makes it very confusing for anyone, the student and the employer, as to what we really want to do.
Yeah, and what you're describing about closer linkages with employers, right? Defining these standards and taxonomies and there's a lot to it, right? It starts to sound like employers in a way are becoming a new kind of accreditor for higher education, in that this is we know there's accreditation, right, for higher ed institutions, which is not well understood by most people, certainly not by the general public, and even not many people within higher ed. But if an employer says, yes, this is really valuable, I'll either pay for an employee to do it, or I'm going to hire the graduates who get it, or whatever, the employer essentially becomes a new kind of accreditor, right? Validating the quality of what the university is doing. Do you think that there is such a movement? Do you think employers will in effect become a different kind of accreditor for higher ed?
Well, I wouldn't call them accreditors. I call them more as partners. I mean, if you look at accreditation at the sort of rationale for it, and forget about what accreditation is today, the basic rationale was twofold. One was to make sure that there was a threshold of excellence. You wouldn't go below that threshold of excellence. Right. And the other is to have some uniformity across the board, so that when someone said they were going to do a degree in X or a set of courses in Y, that everyone understood that and everyone had a common expectation. I don't think there's anything wrong in building that common expectation with employers as well, as long as we understand two things. The first, that it's a shared responsibility. It's not that academia is giving up its responsibility or the corporate world is giving up its responsibility. Both have to work together to define what is needed for success in the workforce. And then the corporate world has to become an active part of it. It can't just be, okay, academia, fix this, and then we'll get all the students, because the challenge over there is exactly what we are very concerned about, and we've always been concerned about, that if we left it purely up to the corporate world, they'd like a set of students this year who will do X, and then 2 years from now, they'll do Y, so they'll fire all these students they've employed and get the new set. We've got to have that shared responsibility that we're not just looking for profit from the corporate world, but you're going back to lifelong learning and making sure that we have defined what is going to be successful for the student who is also the employee.
Yep.
So I think that partnership is exactly what we need.
Yeah, I think that's a good framing. And, we got a few more minutes left with our time. I told you 30 minutes feels like 12. This is always how it goes. But another question we had, which I think is a good one, Dan asks, is it incumbent on the university to provide connected credentials to the degrees or majors that students are pursuing, right? Where it's like, it's already designed in by the university, this degree goes with this credential. Or should students have access to all credentials a university might offer, just like they have a chosen major? What are your thoughts on that? You're still on mute, Vistasp.
So I don't think it's an either or.
Yeah.
I think we need to do both. We need to make sure that within the degrees that we offer, we also offer the opportunity for a true certification to be provided that is similar to a licensure or a qualification, if you will, that industry recognizes, or a credential that has been actually co-developed with the corporate world in an area workforce needs, so that the student knows that they will be able to get a job if they complete this, in addition to what they would have got just from the degree. But simultaneously, so writ large, when we look at students, we've always wanted to have discovery and inquiry being the heart of what we do in academia. And so I think we've also got to be able to say, if you wanted to get a degree in X, but simultaneously you want to get a certificate or a Y, let's find mechanisms of being able to do that. And we have them in place in order to do that. So I don't think it's an either or. I don't think it's a dichotomy. I think it's that commonality, and we've got to do both in order to make that happen. We've also got to do one more thing. We've got to increase our definition of a student. So a student today is someone who comes for a degree. I think as we go forward, a student has to be anyone who desires knowledge. You can get a lot of information on the web. The challenge is you don't know whether it is right or wrong. That's what a university or an institution of higher education provides, is the absolute stamp that says this is true knowledge that has been verified, validated, and provided to you so that you can benefit from it. And I think that's what we need to do, is to provide those opportunities for students so that they can actually gain it, simultaneously becoming, if you will, the learned citizen and someone who is productive in the workforce from day one, or becomes an entrepreneur, which is becoming more and more powerful today.
Yeah, look, we've got about 2 minutes left, and I'm going to do a bit of a transition because this was someone else you and I were talking about. A lot of, as a former college president, right, who sat in that seat for a number of years and knows how challenging and difficult that role is. There's a lot of college presidents today that have said things to me like, I don't know how much longer I can continue to do this job based on the demands of it today, right? All the things they've been dealing with through the pandemic. Many of them have said things to me like, we haven't been able to focus on anything strategic for the last year because we've been putting out fires, dealing with so many issues, right? And what would be a couple of your points of best advice for those college presidents and leaders out there who are fatigued, running on fumes, haven't been able to get to their strategic work? How can you give them some pointers from the days of old, right, when you wore that hat? I would love to just hear any wisdom you might offer for them.
So the first thing to keep in mind is that while the leadership at any university is feeling fatigued, so are our faculty and staff. And we've got to keep in mind that as we think of what the leadership is going to do as it goes from a day-to-day challenge to strategic thinking of all the things that have not been done over the past year and what needs to be done for the future, we also have to keep in mind that our faculty and staff are perhaps feeling that even more than we are. And therefore, we've got to be able to put in mechanisms that allow for these things to be done simultaneously. We need to look at remote work and say maybe it makes more sense in certain areas to give that flexibility to people to be able to get a better work-life balance. So we need to be able to look at things like how are we building up the core competencies that are not just in a silo, but across the board? How do we truly build up leadership and that cross-cultural understanding that is needed? All these things will have to be looked at simultaneously, and a single individual can't do it. So depending on the rest of the university, which has some tremendous talent, is going to be what is needed. We've got a tremendous opportunity. I don't see it as a challenge. I view this as an opportunity to re-envision not just what a university could have done in the past and now has the opportunity to do, but also for us to rewrite our social compact with other communities we serve, so that we can truly look at this being a new way of looking at an institution of higher ed, so that anyone with any background, with any socioeconomic status, the knowledge progression that they need, because we now have the opportunity to do it. And that's going to take a team effort. It's not one person.
Well, I like the encouragement around empowerment and delegation and looking at our community as an incredible asset, which obviously on all these campuses across America, it most definitely is. Thank you very much for joining us today. I look forward to continuing to read your writing and hear your thoughts, Vistasp. For those of you who are interested, next week I'm going to be hosting Leo Lambert, the former president of Elon University and author of Relationship Rich Education. Definitely encourage you to join us next week. Thank you again, sir, for joining us, and I hope everybody has a great day.